You're watching Public Affairs. Berkowitz is my name and politics is our game, and we will be doing lots of politics and public policy this evening because we have as our guest John Tillman, who is the chairman and CEO of the Illinois Policy Institute. And that's, you can find that, www.illinoispolicyinstitute.org. We'll flash that a few times. There you go, you can see that. If you want to track, you can also communicate directly with John Tillman. That's jtillman at illinoispolicyinstitute.org. But the important thing here is you're used to seeing politicians, our regular viewers would know, in that chair. In fact, not too long ago, maybe 4 years ago, you saw Barack Obama, a fair to middling politician in that chair, and he actually visited us 3 or actually 4 prior times. So we do a lot of politics, and you might say, well, why do you have this guy Tillman on? Because it doesn't sound like a politician, Jeff. May not be a politician. But he knows a lot about what politicians deal with. And it's also, that is, public policy. And we don't hear a lot these days, so we don't hear much about free markets. You might say free markets are not even in vogue. And Mr. Tillman knows something about free markets because he spent 2 decades or so, would that be right, in business?
That's about right, yes.
And about 5 years, the last 5, in public policy and
That's
political
correct.
activism. We're taping this on November 2, the year 2008, and we're perhaps on the cusp of a cataclysmic loss by the Republican Party and an historic win for the Democrats and Barack Obama, perhaps. At least that seems to be what the smart money says as of November 2. And the question in part is if the Republican Party goes down, at least in this election, are free markets also going down? Is liberty going down? Because the Republican Party, at least segments of it, have been more identified with free markets than Democrats. Obviously, there are a number of Democrats who are identified with free markets and vice versa, and some Republicans who are more collectivist. But John Tillman, the question is, if that happens, if we're talking about a cataclysmic loss by the Republican Party, should you be advising people to do some naked short sales of free markets? And is the price of capitalism, not to get too scatological, but is it going into the toilet?
No, it's not. In fact, the best time to buy in any market is when the market has decided the assets are priced too high and therefore sell, and you have a low price. And this would be a perfect time to buy free markets and capitalism.
But you agree, you can see right now, they're on the ebb, those things are priced low, so to speak. I
would agree with that, and I think the interesting point is that why is this? Why has it come to the fact where free markets, capitalism, a pro-business culture in America is under assault? The reason is because the Republican Party itself lost its focus to its core principles it supposedly adhered to. George Bush has stewarded the largest growth in discretionary spending in the federal budget since Lyndon Johnson. The loss in 2006 was in part due to the war, but primarily because of disaffected believers in limited government and free markets, and saw that the Republicans were not adhering to those principles. So the reason that this has
That's on a national level.
That's absolutely true here in Illinois as well.
The Illinois government, I mean, are the Republicans responsible for runaway spending in Illinois?
I would say that it's a bipartisan, cooperative effort by both Republicans and Democrats. The government has grown just in the current administration's time by 5.5% a year.
That's Rod Blagojevich.
Rod Blagojevich, right? Since 2000, since his first budget, it's grown by an
average. And then the 4 years preceding under George Ryan.
It grew under George Ryan as well, although not quite as fast. And the budgets have grown year after year. A good example of that
Cook County, just to throw that in. Todd Stroger, before that John Stroger. Do you have a number, or is it just enormous?
I don't have a number other than I can tell you this, that the city of Chicago, Cook County, the state of Illinois, and the top 10 major cities in the state all have record revenues. The fundamental problem with government today is that revenues are spending rather, and demands for spending outstrip revenue growth. Revenues have, until obviously the slowdown is going to have an effect, but revenues have been growing. The taxpayers are doing their part. The politicians cannot say no to any good spending proposal.
Competitor, I think, that you have. You know Ralph Martires?
I'm aware of Ralph,
yes.
You
know the Center for Tax and Budget Accountability?
Yes.
He's the executive director?
Yes, Ralph would have a very different point of view.
He says there are structural deficits in the state, in the county. I imagine he would say city and government, but certainly on the state and county, he said. Structural deficit, you know what he means by structural
deficit?
It's
a fancy word to try to excuse the fact that politicians can't properly set priorities and allocate limited taxpayer resources. It's a way to say that they've spent themselves into structural spending for so long that it's built into future budgets. The cause of that is the fact that the government continues to expand its role. And I'll give you just a simple example at the state level. The spending at the state level since 1990 has grown 44% on an inflation-adjusted basis, while population has grown 12%. So for every percentage population, 1% in population growth, we have a 3.54% growth in government spending, which means the government is getting larger relative to the number of people. And the question is, what is the government doing? And what they're doing is things that create those structural deficits they should not be doing. The rules
That's in the state.
That's in the state.
Well,
those basic
in the US,
points
roughly,
apply.
Is it seriously, would you say similar?
Yes, I haven't looked at the U.S. numbers, but the principle is the same. It's certainly the same in the county. The county is actually depopulating, and yet spending continues to rise.
Well, would you be predicting a big win, seriously, for Barack Obama on November 4th?
Well, anybody who's looking at the numbers and paying any attention would likely predict a win, but politics...
Well, how can that be? I mean, are the Republicans and John McCain talking about earmarks and runaway spending, and he said he's not George Bush because he didn't agree with all of that spending, and yet, you know, Barack Obama would say he's not George Bush either, but I don't think he's done so much to disassociate himself with that large growth in spending, whether from the state of Illinois, whence he came, or from the U.S. government. And yet, Barack Obama is running away with the election. You would think this kind of runaway spending would be the referendum issue.
I think the
What's happening here?
Oh, it's a classic case of the Republicans not doing enough from a communication point of view. If you took somebody with Bill Clinton's rhetorical skills and gave him the same policies that John McCain advocates, but he was as skilled as Bill Clinton at communicating, this race would be a horse race right now. They'd be going neck and neck. I think what's really telling is how Obama has achieved the lead he has, which is by Orwellian doublespeak. He calls his welfare, he calls it a tax cut, when actually what he's doing is taxing the more affluent people in the country and taking that money out of their pocket and putting it into the pocket of people who don't pay any income taxes, and he calls that a tax cut. That's always been called a refundable tax credit, as you know. And so the point is...
Slow down a little bit. When he says he's got a 95%, he's got tax cuts for 95% of the people, and then sometimes he says for 95% of the people who pay taxes.
Yes, he's a little, he jumps around a lot
but
on this.
But if it's the latter, that would be true probably as to what he intends.
Well, his basic point is untrue.
I mean, you agree with it? But
no, I don't agree with that. His basic point, and when he laid this program out initially, he was referring to income taxes. And then when people challenged him on that, he started talking about, well, people also pay payroll taxes.
But if we keep the income taxes and we say he's going to tax people who earn, families who earn $250,000 or more, and he's going to cut taxes for people who earn, families who earn $250,000 or less, probably would be true on the income tax level. He'd be raising taxes on the top 5%. He would be lowering it on the 95% who pay taxes, but earns income less than $250,000.
That's not the point I'm making. The point
no, but I'm just go with me for a second. Then we'll get to your point.
Okay.
Is that point? Would that be what it seems like he intends? We'll see what he does.
No, I think what he intends to do is provide a modest middle-class tax cut to some people in the middle of the pile. This is what he's run on.
But again, that's people earning less than $250,000, all the way down to zero. And
well,
and if you count for, or at least all the way down to $50,000, because at that point people start paying income tax. So people earning between $50,000 to $250,000 would get a tax cut under the Obama plan. That's a middle-class tax cut. People earning above $250,000 would pay more in income tax. That seems to be the plan, right?
Well, we could debate whether that's the plan or not, but I'm not sure what you're trying to drive at. What I'm
trying to drive at is that maybe that's why he's winning, because that seems to be a pretty popular thing. If there's a relatively small number of voters making more than $250,000, large number of voters making less. If you promise something to one, take something away from that small group, isn't that a winning political plan? Not necessarily one you would believe in.
The point I'm trying to make, which I think actually you just made, is that Obama is running on tax cuts, even if it's subterfuge and it's not exactly truthful in terms of what he's going to do, and it's misleading because he calls them a tax cut when it's actually a welfare transfer from a person paying having high wages, paying taxes, and giving to somebody that 40% of the people in this country don't pay any income taxes. Right. Under Obama's plan, they're going to get a refundable tax credit, which means the government will write them a check. Where is that money going to come from? It's going to come out of the pocket of the guy that made more than $250,000, whose taxes Obama has just increased. But that is not how Obama is communicating it. The original question was that I thought was interesting is, why is the Republican Party in trouble and why is Obama winning, which is what you were driving at. Obama is winning is because he's running as a populist in terms of taxes. More people now perceive Obama to be better on taxes for them than they do McCain. because Obama has been more effective at communicating it, and his message has been, I'm going to give a tax cut to 95% of the American people, even though that is impossible to actually do, since only 60% of the American people actually pay taxes. The other point here, though, Jeff, is that this discussion we just had is a great illustration of why McCain is losing. This is sort of the esoteric nature of, probably your audience might enjoy, but for the average voter, and especially that middle voter who's sort of what I call the persuadable middle, who's going to decide this election, they don't engage at this level. What they hear are those ads that Obama is running at record rates, having raised record amounts of money. You know, it's ironic to me that if Obama applied his same principle to this campaign, he would have had to give some of his campaign funding that he's raised at a record level to John McCain and transfer the wealth from his campaign to John McCain to try to equalize the playing field. But that's, of course, not how the world works, nor how politics should work.
So in a sense, John McCain is hoisted on his own petard, because he's the guy who pushed for campaign finance reform. He's the guy who pushes for limitations on how much people can give and perhaps people can spend. He's the one who accepted public financing. Barack Obama took private financing. In that sense, Barack Obama's your guy. He's the free market guy.
I completely agree that Barack Obama should have been able to take private financing, and I think it's richly ironic that John McCain is getting hoisted, as you said. And I was adamantly opposed to McCain-Feingold, and I think it's a terrible encroachment on free speech. And I do find there's irony there, tragic as it may be for somebody who wants limited government.
All right, so getting back to what you folks do at the Illinois Policy Institute, you generally talk about less government. Would that be accurate?
Yes, we believe in, everybody believes.
Limited government, but you're not an anarchist. You're not saying there should be no government.
Exactly. I'll put it this way. Nobody's for unlimited government. That has very bad outcomes. And nobody that I know that's rational is for anarchy.
Well, if you're a communist, you might be for...
Well, exactly. That's bad outcomes, though. I think we've proven
or even
that.
a socialist.
Those are bad outcomes, too, and we might try that recipe again here shortly in this country beyond what we've already done. But so everybody's pretty much for limiting government. The argument is always about where and how and what is the proper role of government. I'm a Madisonian limited government guy. I believe in the Constitution, and I think we've gone a little too far in expanding the role of government. I think that statistic I cited for you earlier is a good example. The 44% growth in spending while the population is growing 12%. It's a simple way to illustrate that government is growing more than the population is.
Okay, and so you want some government. You would agree things like national defense, that would be appropriate and permissible.
Sure.
Police, fire departments.
Absolutely. Those are all reasonable roles for government.
You know, and there is, in economics, there's a thing called a public good. We were talking about this before the show. And those are examples of a public good. In national defense, if you paid for it privately, it'd be kind of inefficient because, my consumption of national defense protecting this country in Illinois doesn't take away from somebody protected by, say, an anti-ballistic missile defense in California. So those things we want to collectivize and avoid a free rider. If a few people got together and put up this anti-ballistic missile system to protect Illinois, and it ends up protecting the whole country, and only the few of us who paid got to, paid for it, we'd have too little because people in California are benefiting, they should be paying too. So in a sense, is that the rationale for government, collectivizing it, having it financed by the government, provided either by the government or privately? Same thing with police. You want those things collectivized so you'll have the optimal amount.
Well, I think the word
Does that make sense to you?
No, not exactly, because I don't like the word collectivize. I would not agree with that. I think what people do is they form governments voluntarily where they are sovereign over the government to make rules of the game to properly regulate those things where people's lives intersect. The whole point of a limited government philosophy is that people should be left to do what they want so long as they don't cause harm to others.
Well, they collectivized, they agreed to have the government provide national defense, and they all pay for it through a tax, in that sense. And that's what I'm using by collectivized.
Right.
You prefer another word, whatever word you want to use. All right, so that's what's going on here in the basics. But what you're saying, this stuff has gotten out of hand.
Yes,
We've gone from national defense and police and fire to all sorts of other things that you're saying perhaps are, if to be provided, should be provided and financed privately. Am I getting that right?
Generally, yes.
Okay. And so when we've talked about the structural deficit that Ralph Martires talks about, and he says, on a state level, revenue rises maybe 2 to 3% a year. He says we have an outdated sales tax system because a lot of things like services aren't taxed. He said that was because at one point we had a substantial product economy as opposed to a service economy. Those should be taxed, and we should be, getting our revenue up at much more than it is now. He said our costs are going up for education and so forth. This is the Martire argument.
Yeah, it's misguided,
I'm-
but
I'm-
it's an interesting argument.
Yeah, and you're saying you would knock that down, that argument down completely by?
Well, first of all, revenues at the state level have gone up 5.5% over the last 5 years. Revenues have gone, if you just put an inflation limit on the revenues of state
So
government.
they're exceeding inflation.
Oh yes, 5.5% over roughly 3%.
And your
for
view
inflation.
is government should be required to live within the inflation increases, even including things like capital expenses as well as operating expenses?
Yeah, I think you have to carve out part of your operating budget and allocate it to capital expenses. That's what a business does. A business or anybody operating a household budget does it that way. But in government, they don't, because there are unrelenting demands for more and more government spending.
But you would say on the state level, the Medicaid costs, they go up 8% a year.
The question
You would
is
say
why,
that
Jeff?
that can't be, you can't hold the state responsible. That's sort of a national trend. This is Martire speaking. Folks, you used to see Ralph Martire up here, and we invite him here. He's not been coming back lately. So I'm doing the best I can to imitate Ralph Martire.
Well, Ralph's an excellent spokesman for his point of view, and you're doing a good job of imitating him. But the core question should always be for Ralph or anyone who advocates more government is, first of all, what do the facts tell us? The facts tell us that Illinois is in a state of economic decline. I refer to it as the economic death spiral. We are losing our market share in terms of people. 727,000 people have left the state over the last 10 years. They're going to greener pastures where they have a greater chance for prosperity. Illinois has the 9th highest property tax burden, the 1st highest. We rank #1 in the country in terms of Cook County in the city of Chicago in sales taxes. Ralph likes to point out we have a low flat income tax, but our overall tax burden is 14th highest and growing. So,
And by overall, you're counting?
I'm talking about total federal, state, local taxes. Illinois residents pay
Federal tax, sales tax, property
everything.
tax.
Total
You would say, why do you
taxation.
count federal tax? Because
I love that when Ralph brings that
Ralph
up,
brings
because
that up.
Ralph likes to pretend that people pay taxes in little silos. That's not how it works. They pay taxes out of one checkbook.
But they would pay the same federal tax, presumably, whether they were in Illinois
But
or
that's-
Arizona.
but the reason-
Isn't that Ralph's point?
That is Ralph's point, but it's irrelevant. The right point is how do people make economic decisions? People make economic decisions based on the last dollar of taxes they pay. It's sort of like, remember the game, Let's Make a Deal. Door number 1, door number 2, door number 3. The way a business person or an employee that's thinking of relocating looks at it, if I go through door number 1, I'm going to pay $100 in taxes. If I go through door number 2, I'm going to pay $120 in taxes. And if I go through door number 3, I'm going to pay $125 in taxes or $155 in taxes. How much of that amount is federal, state, and local is irrelevant to him. What he says is, where can I go to get the lowest number? I'll take door number 1. I'll take Texas. I'll take Tennessee. I'll take Nevada, where they don't have any income tax and they have a
Does
lower
the federal
overall.
tax affect what he's paying in Illinois relative to Texas? Would he be paying the same federal tax? That's Ralph's point. And so which would the door,
I don't know the answer to that,
but
but that's not the question that
But
we have
is
to.
the last dollar affected? That's what you said. It's the last dollar he's
It's
paying.
it's the marginal tax you pay by choosing to live in a particular
And
locality.
is that affected by? Is the federal tax affected by which locality you live in?
I'm not. I wouldn't think so.
So that would be Ralph's
I'd have to
point.
get
That would be Ralph's point. Say why talk about it then?
Well, you're missing my point. My point is that people don't pay based upon federal taxes. People pay. It's sort of like your grocery bill, right? When you pay your grocery bill, you don't carve out your milks versus your eggs versus your meats. You have to pay the whole thing to feed the family. Taxes are a total thing. So if you can go to a different grocery store and save on the milk that you have to buy, you'll start shopping that store because it'll bring your total tax burden down. That's the point that Ralph keeps missing. And the reason he keeps missing that, the more important question is, why doesn't he want to talk about that? Because it doesn't make, he can't make his point then. And the point is, why do people leave here? Why are entrepreneurs not coming to this state and starting businesses? Why are entrepreneurs choosing to reinvest in other states rather than Illinois? It's because Illinois' rules of the game are hostile to business. That's why.
Is it the per capita tax that's higher in Illinois relative to other states?
Is
Is that a relevant thing to look at? Because actually, I've
per
had the debate
capita,
with
per
Ralph.
capita tax
It is pretty high.
It is pretty high.
But you know what he says? He says, Jeff, you shouldn't look at just per capita tax. You should deflate by the income, that the burden. And so he says the burden in Illinois, because we're a higher income state than Arkansas, is actually higher even if our per capita taxes, are higher in Illinois than in Arkansas, but we have a higher income. He says the burden is less, so you should deflate by the income when you compare Arkansas.
Well, that's
with Illinois.
obviously a wrong way to look at it as well, because the point is.
I said that too, but Ralph wasn't persuaded.
Well, Ralph is not easily persuadable.
But
once
Eric
he has his
Zorn wasn't
mindset.
persuaded either, too, because we've been arguing that with Eric Zorn. So.
Well, you have to actually figure out how people make decisions in their daily life.
Okay.
You know, the prosperity of this state is based upon an intersection of investors, entrepreneurs, and workers. They make the decisions the way I'm describing.
So per capita taxes count.
Sure, that's worth looking at. That's one of many variables we should look at.
And that's one of the things people look at when they decide where they're going to live, where they're going to work, where they're going to put their facility if they're an employer, and so
Right.
forth. And in Cook County, when we pay very high sales taxes, as recently Todd Strozier has raised it to what is the total sales tax in Chicago as a part of Cook County is over 10% now.
Right.
Pretty high tax. So when people choose where they're going to buy products, if they can go to Lake County and they're in a bordering area and it's a substantial purchase, they may choose to do that.
Absolutely.
So
It's happening all the time right now. If we had the time and interest, if you went to all the malls outside of Cook County and started counting up people and where they're from, you'll find an awful lot of them from Cook County.
All right, let's go over to education. That's also a big theme of the Illinois policy.
We love to talk about education and the failure of the current system.
And
we'd like to find some reforms that'll help the kids.
What would be the most important reform, as you
The
say?
simplest, easiest reform right now would be to raise the charter cap. Right now, Illinois has a law that requires, that limits the number of charter schools in the city of Chicago to 30. The statewide cap is 60. That law should be repealed, and there should be no charter cap on the number of schools operating under the charter law in the state of Illinois. Charter schools outperform traditional public schools. I'll give you a quick example. In the city of Chicago, they graduate 51% in the traditional public schools. Charter schools are graduating 77%, which also happens to be the overall statewide average. The more interesting thing is in some of those charter schools, like Chicago International Charter Schools, the graduation rate's up around 85%. So many of the charter schools in the city are performing on par with their much praised suburban and downstate counterparts.
All right, so charter schools, by lifting the caps, you give people an alternative if they want to form a charter. They have to apply, they have to get a group together, they have to get approved by very much the public school system, which they're going to compete with, right?
Right, the authorizing law should also be changed as part of that to make it easier for those entrepreneurs who want to come in and help kids get a better education to start charter schools.
So charters are good, but they may have some limitations. How about school vouchers, school choice? What do you think of those?
I'm a big fan. I think one of the interesting things about school choice is that the Illinois people are big fans of school choice. We participated in a poll with the Friedman Foundation last December and found that 4 out of 5 people would send their child to a school other than a traditional public school if they had free and unfettered choice. That sentiment tells you why the unions, the teachers union, is so opposed to school choice, and it tells you that the parents understand that more choice means a better outcome for their children.
So in that foundation you referred to, the Friedman Foundation, that's the Milton
and Rose Friedman Foundation based in Indianapolis.
Because Milton Friedman, the great economist from the University of Chicago, now deceased, but
right.
50 years or so ago, he started talking about and writing about school vouchers, school choice.
Yes.
So we spend right now in the city of Chicago, it's a $6 billion budget, about 370,000 students. We spend over $14,000 per kid. If you divide that $6 billion budget by the number of students, you get 14,000 plus, let's say 14,500 per kid per year.
Right.
Okay? That's what we spend. So take that 14,000, we do this little experiment where we take our backpack and we put, if we had 14,000 here, we take this as symbolically, per kid, that's what we're spending. Instead of giving them the education in kind that's worth 14,000 plus, we put it in the backpack and we hand it to you, John Tillman.
Thank you so much.
I'm
going to go select the best school that is best for my child, that matches up with their needs. And it may be a traditional public school that's doing well, or it may be a private school of one type or another. It may be a charter school that operates within the public school system. Thank you for the freedom to choose what's best for my child.
You would like, and if you had the opportunity, especially in the city of Chicago, where the inner city schools, many of them are failing, not doing well, not performing, if you could wave a wand and give the parents of those 360,000 students, I think you used to say 400,000, but I think it's gone down. If you can give them all 360,000 backpacks with the 14,000 per kid per year, it wouldn't cost the city of Chicago anymore.
No.
But people would get more choice.
Absolutely.
They'd go. So many might stay in their public schools, but many would leave. And you're saying they would all be better off, right?
Absolutely.
And you like to give them that.
I would absolutely
School
like to
voucher,
do that.
school choice. You signed up right here?
I would sign up for anything that empowers parents to make better choices and more choices for their own children. Vouchers are an excellent public policy. Education tax credits, we've done a lot of work in that area. We think that's excellent policy. Of course, charter schools are an excellent policy. There's many ways to do this.
But, Barack Obama, when he sat here in 2002, in June 2002, he said he would do anything that would be better for the kids. And he said the inner city conditions were admittedly intolerable. We had to improve them. And I said even vouchers, and he came pretty close to saying, yeah, even vouchers in 2003 when he was a bona fide U.S. Senate candidate, then not so much, then charter schools. But one of the things that Barack Obama said was a concern is that this would tier, if we had school voucher, school choice, you would tier well, I guess you would have public and private schools. You would tier those schools, and people would take the vouchers and go to the better schools and leave sort of the bad education for the others.
There are so many things.
Is there anything that makes sense to you?
It's one of the, with all due respect to Senator Obama, who may soon be our esteemed leader of this country, that's one of the silliest things I've ever said. What he's advocating is letting 100% of the children continue to go to schools that are failing and not have the opportunity for success in their life that he has had, as opposed to starting by fixing some of the problem, by taking some of those kids and letting them exercise choice, and in that process be able to concentrate resources more clearly on those kids that stay in traditional schools and help those traditional public schools get better.
And that's what he did, because he went to high school at a private school. It was a scholarship. Effectively, it was a charter. Effectively, it was a voucher program. He went to Occidental private college, Columbia University private college.
Choices worked well for Senator Obama.
Substantial aid, Harvard Law School. So it's worked well. And of course, he sends his own kids to the University of Chicago Lab School, which is a private school,
right,
which he said he got a break because he was teaching at the University of Chicago. But he should want to give that same choice that he has exercised to everybody, right?
You've said it very well.
All right, well, maybe he'll come back and we'll find out if Barack Obama's changed
I'm sure
his
he'll
mind.
be back in January. Won't be
Absolutely. Well, you know, the thing we'll say that is a real plus to Barack Obama, and we'll see on the 4th where he's elected president, as a state senator and then as a U.S. Senate candidate, the man came out and sat in this chair 5 times, which is more than we can say for either of the people running in the 10th Congressional District, Mark Kirk and Dan Seals.
So is it cause and effect if you sit in this chair, you do eventually become president?
You are on track to become president
Excellent.
of the United States, John Tillman.
My 10-year-old,
You got
about to be
political
10-year-old daughter
ambitions?
would love that.
You think you might want to run sometime?
No, I think I'm doing a good job of trying to, I'm trying to do a good job, and we stay humble every day to try to help put forth good public policies that promote free markets, limited government, and really try to put more of the emphasis on what is the proper role of government. The problem with the state is that it's a government-centric state. Both parties have addressed it, and what we need is a liberty-centric state that empowers individuals to make better decisions for themselves.
Well said. We're going to continue to speak as the credits roll, but I really just want to thank our guest, John Tillman. He is the chairman and CEO of the Illinois Policy Institute. You can find that by going to www.illinoispolicyinstitute.org. You can send him an email to jtillman. That's jtillman@illinoispolicyinstitute.org. He's a man who started out in the private sector, sales management, built up a group business unit, $30 million unit, ran a 300-person sales team, call service operator, call center operator, launched Sports Ideas, eventually sold out your interest in 2007.
Small retail business, yep.
Launched several other businesses, transitioned into public policy, political activism as president of Americans for Limited Government,
right,
appropriately named. Grew that group from 1 to a staff of 25, dealing with and affecting political activity in 13 states in 2006. So you're a man who knows something about the free market. And now you're going around proselytizing for that. And I use that in a positive way. It sounds like
it's a great positive word. I'm often asked what I think about
NPR. You go over to the liberals at NPR and try and tell them.
I'll go anywhere people want to talk about.
You go to conservatives at Fox. You spread the whole gamut.
I've been on both of those, and I'm always happy to go talk to anybody about the fact that people will do better with liberty principles.
Real quick, state level. What should Rod Berkowitz do?